Zalman, it's shorter. It's a little shorter than yesterday. Maybe give everybody another minute.
Don't worry, they'll come on. Okay, good morning, everybody. As we start the chitas for today, we'll mention in the morning, we'll mention the beginning and at the end. The learning today is in memory of Chaim David Shlomo ben Pinchas Levi. Shama Shahav and Aliyah. He's going to be ambassador of goodness and kindness to his whole beautiful family. We are now going to go to the Chumash of today. And we're going to start with the chapter. Today is Wednesday. Let's start with chapter 25, verse number 29. If a man sells a residential house, he sells his home. We started off this teaching before. A little bit, the Torah goes now into more depth. If a person sells his house that's in a walled city, then he can redeem it. Redemption may take place into the completion of the year of sale. That's it. If it's a walled city, he is allowed to redeem the field, the house, in the year. Rashi says, Beis Moshav Ir Chayma, this is like a walled city, like Jerusalem is the old city, is a walled city. So Rashi says, Beis Moshav Ir Chayma, Beis B'teich Ir, this is a house within a city, surrounded by walls, and the walls need to be there from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Then the redemption may take place until the completion of the year of its sale. So Rashi says, since the field, regarding a field, scriptures, the Torah says that one may redeem it whenever one wishes after 2 years has elapsed, since the date of sale and onwards, until Jubilee. And within the first 2 years following the sale, one may not redeem it, as we learned before. Torah found it necessary to specify that in this case, the opposite applies, namely, that if one wishes to redeem it within the first year, one may redeem it. While after that, after the first year, one is not allowed to redeem it. I'm not doing right Chumash. I'm sorry, I'm not doing right Chumash. Thank you very much. I'm not doing right Chumash. I was doing tomorrow's Chumash. I appreciate it. Shikoyach for telling me. Okay, we're going back a little bit, my friends. We'll start that tomorrow. So we can start all again. We're learning today in memory of Chaim David Shlomo ben Pinchas Levi, the Neshama Shahav and Aliyah. And it should be a better, good ambassador of goodness and kindness to his family. Okay, we're starting chapter 27, verse number 1. God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the Jewish people of Amat Aleim and tell them, Ish ki yaflin neder. If when a man expresses a vow, pledging, what is he pledging? He's pledging the value, his value. The Fashat Hashem is present at the value of lives to the God. Now she says, Kiyafle means expresses verbally. It's not a contract, it's a verbal expression. Whether to give the value of his life, saying, I take upon myself to donate to the Holy Temple the value of nefashis, organs such as the head or the liver. A guy who says such a thing, I'm giving my value. So what is the value? The Torah says here the Torah gives a fixed value. For 20 years and above, ben shishim until 60. Then the value from 20 to 60 is 50 shekel. B'shekel HaKodesh. 50 shekel. So Rashi said the value stated here is not an expression of monetary value, the usual market value of a person sold as a slave. Whatever he has a high market value, a low market, we don't go and value the person what he's valued to become a worker. This is a Torah value. That's it. The Torah gives it a value. It's a fixed value. So the guy can be worth $1 million on the market, so to say, but his value over here is 50 shekel. Rashi says the last letter of is Chav is not the second person. Okay, this is a grammar. So erech is a value. If it's a woman, then her value, she has to give 30 shekels. From 5 years old to 20 years old. Then the value of a male is 20. And the value, what she has to give is 10. So that's not that the one who's vowing is a minor, because a minor cannot vow, because a minor's word is not valid. Rather, our verse is speaking of an adult who says, I take upon myself to the holy temple the value of this 5-year-old. So that's what we're talking about. When a person says, I'm talking about, I'm giving the value of a 5-year-old. Not a 5-year-old can make such a vow. From 1 month old until 5 years old, then the value for a male is 5, and for a woman it's 3. Girls 3. Now we go. Pasha Torah doesn't want to depress the 60-year-olds and above. So verse 7. If he's 60 or Mila, if now we're holding 60, we went till 60, now we're holding 60 and above. If he's a male, his value drops from 50 to 15. And for women, it drops 10 shekels. So Rashi said, those who love this Rashi says when people reach the venerable age, a woman's value comes closer than to a man. A man's value from 60 and above drops drastically. His value drops drastically, but a woman doesn't drop so bad. This is why a man decreases in value in the old age to beyond a third of his value. As an adult who's 50 and now he went up to 15. Well, a woman in the old age decreases only 1/3 her value, namely 30 to 10, as people say. An old man in the house is a breach in the house. Old man in the house is a tzaddik in the house. An old woman in the house, a hidden treasure in the house, it's a good sign in the house. So that's the way it is. Verse number 8. If he's too poor to pay the valuation, and he should stand before the kohen. And the kohen will make the valuation. According to what the person can come up with, the kohen will make that value. So Rashi said that he cannot afford to pay the fixed valuation amount. He shall stand him, the one making the vow should stand up, and the one whose value he pledged before the kohen, who will then evaluate him in the view of how much the one pledging the vow can afford. According to how much he can pay, the kohen shall estimate the valuation with the reference of how much the one who's vowing owns, leaving him his basic necessities. Namely, a bed, a bolster, a pillow, tools of his trade. If he's a donkey driver, the kohen must make the valuation that he leaves him his donkey. So in essence, we don't make the person, because he made a pledge to the Beis HaMikdash, We don't take away everything that he has. Self-understood. We want to make sure that he can continue to survive. Verse number 9. Now, if the animal whose type is fit to be brought as an offering to the Lord, whatever part of the person donates to the Lord shall become holy. What does that mean? If a person says, Rashi says, the leg of this animal shall be burnt offering, his words has validity. And how is his vow expedited? The entire animal, except the leg, should be sold to one who needs a burnt offering. And the money received for this sale, which excludes the value of that limb, that he said the leg shall be for the sanctuary, becomes non-consecrated. And the entire animal can be brought by both parties as a burnt offering. So that's the way you do it. If a guy says only a leg, you cannot bring only a leg to the Beis Hamikdash. How does he do that? So therefore, now that he said such a statement, why would he say such a thing? I don't know. But he said the statement, I want to give this leg of the animal to the Beis Hamikdash. Now he has to sell the whole animal to somebody else who wants to bring a carbon also. And now he'll sell it to him besides the value of the leg, because the leg doesn't belong to him. He can't sell it to the second party because it doesn't belong to him. So now he'll sell it to whatever the rest of the animal is worth, and they'll both bring it as a carbon. He'll have to find somebody who's willing to share with him this carbon. Verse 10, shall not exchange it or to offer a substitute. Once you consecrate the animal, you cannot substitute it. And if he decides he wants a substitute, he should realize behema b'behema, he's going to substitute an animal with animal. What happens is both of now these animals become holy. And both these animals now need to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash. What means something good and bad, meaning an unblemished animal in a place of a blemished animal. How much more so should he receive lashes if he replaces a good unblemished for another good one, or he replaces a bad blemished animal with another bad one, in which case he did not raise the standards of consecrated animal. So therefore, he did a negative commandment, as he saw the wording of the Rashi, that he gets to, so to say, he gets lashes for doing a sin. Besides that his animal becomes holy, second animal, both animals become holy. He basically did an aveda. One of the 365 negative commandments. Okay, verse 11. Kol behema timeya, im kol behema timeya, asher lo yakver mekam l'Hashem. If any unclean animal, whose type shall not be brought an offering for the Lord, then he shall stand up the animal before the kohen. Rashi says, but the case of an unclean animal is stated already, verse 27. Later on, we mentioned about a behemoth tamei. So what over here is what is the meaning of this verse? The text is speaking about a blemished animal, not a tamei that it's tummy, impure. Torah is talking about a blemished animal. Torah calls it impure, the blemished animal. The text is speaking about a blemished animal, which is unclean, unfit for sacrifice. And scripture, the Torah is teaching us that an unblemished, consecrated animal cannot leave the holy status and enter into the ordained status through redemption unless they become blemished. So that's the only way, if I consecrate an animal, the only way it can become unconsecrated is by it becoming a blemish, by the animal becoming blemished, breaking its leg, or all the laws of we learned before, the laws that blemish an animal. We mentioned scratched eye, scratched lip, etc. The kohen shall evaluate whether it's good or bad. Whatever the kohen will evaluate, that's the value of the animal. And now he takes the value because it blemished, it becomes unconsecrated, and he buys another animal. For anyone else but the owner who wishes to purchase it for the possession of temple treasure. So the kohen will say what this animal is worth. And now if he comes to redeem it with the value that the kohen said you need to pay, he shall add a fifth to its value. She says, meaning the owner himself redeems the animal. Scripture is more stringent with the owner, obligated to add a fifth of its value. Likewise, in the case of one who consecrated his house, and likewise in the case of one who consecrated his field, and likewise in the case of redemption of the second type, all these cases, the owner must add a fifth to the value. But no one else who redeems it needs to add a fifth. It means that the Beis Hamikdash wants to redeem an animal that became unfit. They don't need to add a fifth. They just need to redeem the animal, pay for the animal. But the owner, if the owner wants to redeem the animal because he, for whatever reason, the animal became unfit, then he has to add a fifth. Verse 14. So too, we just mentioned about an animal. So too, if a person sanctified, consecrated his house. Right? What is the Beis Hamikdash doing with the guy's house? So now the Beis Hamikdash got a house. Beis Hamikdash doesn't need a house. So over to the Beis Hamikdash, he's going to sell it. The kohen will evaluate. What is the value of the house? Whatever the kohen evaluates the value of the house, and now somebody comes, redeems it, and now the house becomes unconsecrated. So the house becomes the house of a personal person, the private property. But again, just like the animal, if the one who consecrated the house now comes to the Beis Hamikdash and says, I want to redeem the house that I sanctified, he has to pay whatever the kohen will evaluate, and he has to add a fifth. We are more stricter. You see, the Torah is more stricter with the owner that comes himself. You should have given the money to the tzedakah. Why'd you consecrate your house and now you want the house back? So that's why you need to add a fifth to the value of your house. And once he pays for the house, whatever the kohen says, the value he wants for the house, now he adds a fifth to that value and he gets back his house. And that completes the Chumash for today. Let me make sure I have the right Tanya of the day. I do. Okay, today is the 24th day of the month. We're coming close to the first part of the end of Tanya, holy chapter 51 of Tanya. The Rebbe over here explains a very beautiful thing. Very beautiful interpretation and the concept of what we always mention, the concept of the Shechina, the Hashras HaShechina. And what does that exactly mean? How does that happen? Let's go a little bit. He has an interesting explanation before the actual chapter. This title page of Tanya tells us that the entire work is based, right? The title page of Tanya, the beginning of Tanya, when we started Tanya, it says it's based on the verse, for this thing of the Torah is near to you, in your mouth and your heart, that you may do. It's a verse in Deuteronomy. And the concluding phrase, that you may do it, implies that the ultimate purpose of the entire Torah is to fulfill the mitzvahs. That's what the ultimate purpose of the entire Torah is that you should do it. So that's the pasuk says, that you should do it. In order to clarify this, in chapter 35, if you remember, began to explain the purpose of Seder Shtalshlus, the chain of descent of spiritual levels from the highest emanation of the Creator down to our physical world, and man serving God. The purpose of both to bring the revelation of God's presence into the lowly world and to elevate the world spiritually so that it becomes fitting dwelling for the place for his presence. So it's a both way. It's to bring God to the world and it's to bring the world higher. To further explain this, in chapter 35, the Alter Rebbe quoted the words of the Yonka. The Yonka is young in the Zohar. The Zohar says a statement of a young sage. He calls him Yonka. The Zohar that a Jew should not walk 4 cubit, a Jew, a man, should not walk with his bare head 4 cubits. 4 cubits like 6 feet. Why? Why shouldn't a person, a man, walk 4 cubits, 6 feet, without a yarmulke? Why shouldn't he do that? So the Yonka, the Zohar says, because the Shechina dwells above his head. So the light, the divine presence, continues to resembles the light of a lamp. So he has to look. The Zohar says, Kiner Hashem Nishmas Adam. The Zohar is explaining that a human being has to look at himself like a candle. When the oil, the wick are needed for the flame to keep burning. The flame is above his head. A Jew should therefore be aware, says the Zohar, that the Shechina, presence of God, is above him, and keep it supplied with oil. That fire needs to keep on fire. Good deeds. What's the oil? The oil is good deeds. In order to ensure the flame of the Shechina keeps his hold on the wick on his body. So the Zohar explains, the Yonka, that is the concept, and it says, the Kiner Hashem, the candle of God, is the soul of man. A candle has 3 things: has oil, has a wick, and has a fire. All 3 things are needed. We need the fire. You need the wick to keep the fire in here, down on the wick. And you need the oil to make sure the fire stays on the wick. So what is these 3 things? So the oil, the wick is the body. The oil is the good deeds. And the fire flame is God, is the neshama. Based on this analogy of the Zohar, Alter Rebbe asked in the same chapter 35, why the oil fuel for the light of the Shechina has to be good deeds. The divine soul is truly a part of God. Why is it not sufficient to serve as fuel? So why do we need to have mitzvahs? Isn't the soul godly enough that it should be able to be fueled on its own? Why does the soul need mitzvahs? And he answers that the divine soul, even a perfect tzaddik, is a conscious entity. The conscious existence of the soul does not become utterly overwhelmed and nullified by God's presence in the world to the extent that the soul can become one in God's presence. Therefore, the soul cannot serve as fuel for the light of the Shechina, for the oil must be totally converted into light, just as the physical fuel is consumed and burned to become converted into light, where the soul remains conscious existence. So the Alter Rebbe says, explain that since the soul needs to have its own identity, and we don't want the soul to be consumed in the light. We want the soul to stay in its existence. Therefore, we need something else to be consumed in the light, and that is the mitzvah. And that's why we want the mitzvah to be the oil and not the soul. Where the soul remains conscious existence, the only good deed mitzvahs can serve as a fuel for the light of the Shechina, for they are God's will and His wisdom, because the mitzvah itself is the will of God and the wisdom of God, which are extension of His essence. We explained in Tanya over and over that God's will and God's wisdom is God. So therefore, the perfect thing for the soul to be connected to God is God's wisdom through learning Torah and God's mitzvahs to doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that can become totally consumed by the flame, and therefore, which expression of His essence, and thus utterly united with Him. For the soul to become united with God, it must therefore perform mitzvahs. So therefore, the soul needs God, needs to have the mitzvah. The soul needs the mitzvah. Just like the oil needs, the fire needs the oil. In this union, the soul with God through mitzvahs, there are two levels. Through Torah study, the light of the Shekhinah is revealed within the soul together with the soul's two inner garments, thought and speech, which become absorbed into God's light and united with it in utter oneness. So Torah creates that because the levush neshama, right? We explained that there's the soul and the garments of the soul. The garments of the soul are thought, speech, and action. So we have the first two things that are connected to the soul through its garments, that the garments give the capability to the soul, because the garments, thought and speech, and Torah is the chachma and the dibur shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the wisdom and speech of God. So through those two levels, I have the unity of the soul in the garments of thought and speech of Torah. So I accomplish that in that way, and it becomes absorbed. But the Shekhinah to rest upon the physical body and upon the animal soul that animates it, now we have to come to mitzvahs. Torah is not enough to be able for the soul to connect the physical world. That's why Hamaisu Ikin. That's why the most important thing is action. Because it's wonderful to connect your soul through the garments of thought and speech. It's wonderful. It's unbelievable. You become united in thought and speech with God. But we need to unite God with the world, with the physical world, and that is mitzvahs. That's the ratzon of the Eibishter. That's the ultimate will of God. And if we do the will of God in the physical world, then we are creating, since it's the will of God, we're creating a total unity between the physical thing and God. And that's why we need to do the oil. In the oil itself, there's two things. There's the Torah part of the oil and the mitzvahs part of the oil. This takes place only through the medium of animating vital soul together with the body. And that's the ultimate concept. That the ultimate aspect is that the oil, the flame consumes the wick itself. Together with the oil, the flame consumes the oil. That's the ratzon and the wisdom of God, and also ultimately the wick. Chapter 51. In further chapters, Alter Rebbe explains how the ultimate purpose of the entire Seder is Shtalshlus. Shtalshlus means the descent of God to the world in the particular performance of mitzvahs, which only can reveal God's presence in this physical world. From there, we went on to say that in order the mitzvahs prove properly with enthusiasm and the soul, one must have kavanah. Remember all of this, what we learned in the last 10 chapters. Devoted concentration, animated of awe and love of God. And in chapter 41 to 50, the Alter Rebbe proceeded to elaborate on various means of arriving at different forms of level of awe and love of God. Now we come to chapter 51. Chapter 51 now explains further teaching of the Yonka. This young, going back to chapter 35, with Alter Rebbe brought us this concept. Kiner Hashem Nishmas Adam. He brought up this beautiful teaching for the soul of man is the Hashem, the candle of God is the soul of man. That this light, the Shekhinah, needs oil. And the Zoya oil usually refers to Sfiras HaChachma. Oil, that's why, because oil soft. There's many reasons. Oil floats on everything. So it shows on the concept of wisdom, which is above. Here, though, the Yonka takes it to refer to good deeds. So how do you put the two things together? What is the connection between the practical mitzvah and oil, which refers to chachma? How do we put the two things? To clarify this, chapter 51 will explain the meaning of a concept that the Shekhinah dwells or rests upon something and how practical mitzvahs do indeed derive from the divine level of Chachma, which is why they can serve as oil, which enables the light of the Shekhinah to remain burning upon the wick of the human body. So we're going to be a little bit Kabbalistic and a little bit bring it down into a practical concept of how we bring these two concepts together. How we bring Chachma and mitzvahs through the analogy of oil, which the Zohar explains that the analogy is oil, and how oil brings about both the aspect of wisdom and action to come together as one. Okay. To further explain the words of this Yonka, this young guy, mentioned earlier in chapter 35 of Tanya, where the Yonka was quoted as saying, the light of the Shekhinah, which dwells upon the Jew, needs oil, meaning good deeds. That's what the Zohar said. Yonka said, now the connection the good deeds have with oil, which is usually referred to Chacham. So we first have to explain what is the meaning. We're going back all the way to the Beis Hamikdash, the Mishkan. Make for me a Beis Hamikdash, and I will dwell in it. That's the concept of you got the word Hashras Hashchina. That's the Hebrew words. Hashras Hashchina. The Shechina dwelling. Over here in Hebrew, it goes the other way. Hashra, the dwelling of the Shechina. Over here, so the concept of the Shechina, dwelling. The dwelling of the Shechina. Shechina means sheikhin. The word Shechina itself, the root word is sheikhin, to dwell, to rest. What does that mean? It means, in a simple term, it means where was the dwelling of the Shechina? Where was the presence of the Shechina? Where was the presence of the Shechina? Where did, so to say, God rest? In the Holy of Holies. Right? Indeed, there were detailed laws defining marks, respect due to the Holy of Holies. Right? We know nobody was allowed into the Holy of Holies. Even the Kohen Gadol was not allowed into the Holy of Holies. It was only allowed into the Holy of Holies only on Yom Kippur, and only if he did certain things. So, why wasn't he allowed? Because the presence of God was there. So if you understand, we have to understand what that means. And then we have to understand that God is resting upon your head. The Torah says, there's Hashras Hashchina in the Holy of Holies. But the Torah says, every man needs to wear a yarmulke because God is walking over him. God is shaking above him. God, just like God is in the Kodesh Kodashim, in the Holy of Holies, he's standing on top of his head. And likewise, any other place where the Shekhinah dwells. What does that mean? What is the meaning? What means that we say a particular location is distinguished a place where the Shekhinah dwells rather than anywhere else? The Eibishter fills the entire world. What do you mean God is the top of your head? God is in the Holy of Holies. God is all over the world. So how do we thought God is in the Holy of Holies? God is everywhere. So what does that mean? Alter Rebbe will now explain that the Shekhinah dwelling upon something means revelation of the aspect of God's presence known as Shekhinah. Although God exists everywhere, his existence is concealed. Again, this one we have taught this in many different ways. The concept, like the Alter Rebbe explains, Sefer Kalam and Malach Kalam, it's where something is revealed or something is hidden. When the Shekhinah dwells upon something, it denotes a revelation of godliness. However, the key to understanding this, it says in the verse, "Mipsari echze elaka." The verse says, "From my flesh I see God." Now, the Rebbe understands these words literally, that we see within ourselves. In our own body, we can visualize a parallel spiritual level in divine emanation of the worlds in general. You want to understand the way this whole thing works? Look in your body. That's what the verse says. What am I supposed to look at? The analogy, look at your soul. Your human soul pervades all 248 organs of the body. The highest part of the body to the lowest part of the body, the foot, from the head to toe, right? Because your whole body is living. The soul pervades the body to the extent that no organ or portion remains void of the soul. If it would be void of the soul, it would die. Nevertheless, we all know, we all know that even though the soul resides in the entire body, its most important place is the head. And from the brain, it goes to the rest of the body. Now, you should realize that this takes place in all organs simultaneously. Because the Rebbe explains that this diffusion of the soul refers to the life force from which the organs derive its vitality, in which respect all organs are equal. This one aspect of the soul emanating from the brain to the organs, and in Hasidic terminology, it can in turn light, a revelation which is equal throughout. A second aspect of the emanation that the organ derives from the soul, in which the brain is the following, in which from the soul, which is in the brain, is the following. So there's one concept. Moreover, each organ receives from the soul a different life force and a functional power appropriate to according to that organ, according to its composition and its character. In other words, the difference between the functional ability of one organ and that of another does not derive from the organ. Like water is colored glass, for example, which takes on the color of its contained vessel. Rather, each organ draws from the soul its ability to see or to hear, and so on. It comes from the soul. The body doesn't give the in essence, the body doesn't give the, like a colored vessel gives the color of water. The body doesn't give the quality of the soul. The soul has within it all qualities. It has within it sight, movement, hearing, feeling, touching. It has within it. And then sight, the capability of sight goes to the eye. The capability of hearing goes to the ear. The capability of smell goes to the nose. The capability of pumping goes to the eye, and so on and so forth. So the eye receives from the soul life force, the ability to see. The power of sight, according with the smooth and translucent nature of the tissue of the eye. That means in the soul, there's already the concept of sight. The soul has the concept of sight and therefore goes to the vessel. And the ear receives the soul life force, the ability to hear. And the mouth to speak. And the foot to walk. That means each organ in the body, in accordance with its composition and character, receives its life force and ability for the soul, which dwells and becomes revealed initially in the brain. This is a little tough subject. You'll see the Rebbe, we'll look at the Rebbe's commentary to this whole concept in a moment. We see clearly we sense clearly how the brain, one of the conscious of all that occurs within the 248 organs, and everything experienced by them, ultimately everything experienced by the brain. You have you have a pain in the toe is because your brain. So the brain goes to vitality, the brain that goes to the toe, it feels the pain. And everything that happens to any part of the body all resonate back to the brain. It comes from the brain, resonates back to the brain. Because the brain is the nerve center and the principal abode for the source of life force in the entire body. So the brain has the entire body and then gives to each limb what it needs, the energy and the capability to what it needs. If there's a chas v'shalom, something, a person that's the entire person has a stroke, God forbid, where there's a cutoff between the brain and the limb, we have a problem. The brain has the capacity still in it, the capable, because it has a soul. I mean, the brain, the soul has the capability to still see, but its connection to flow to the eye has now been broken. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, here adds a commentary which clarifies the subject. By way of introduction, the life force from the soul which animates the body comprised of two aspects. One is its life-giving force. Life. In that the whole body is alive and draws its vitality from the soul. In this aspect, there's no difference between one and the other. Every organ has life. Life, the concept of life, we're all living. The whole body's living. That's the beauty. We don't realize how complicated until somebody gets sick, chas v'shalom. We don't realize how complicated this issue is because we take it to this one, everything is moving. And that's where the equality, Baruch Hashem, when the body is healthy and everything is working, everything sounds like it's one concept. In this respect, there's no difference between one organ and the next one. The head, for example, is no more alive than the foot. Just as the foot is no less alive than the head, we're both alive, we're both working. Everything is flowing. The entire body with all its organs is equal alive throughout. In Chassidus terminology, this aspect of life-giving force is called the light of the soul. Again, we're going to really, we need a doctor here, a neurologist. But over here, we all understand ourselves, feel ourselves. So before we come to a neurologist, we all know that we're alive and we feel ourselves and we feel good and the whole body feels good and we have no aches and pains and everything is going fine. So that Chassidus says, what is that? That shows a light, the flow of light. The flow of light is equal. Light. That's why we compare. Torah is called light. Torah because it's equal. Torah goes through, flows through everything. When everything is good, Torah flows through everything and anything. For light shines equal upon everything around the light force, regardless of quality of nature, objects, don't make a difference. Torah is connected to a 5-year-old child, to a 15, to a sage. That's the first level. The second part of the soul's life force is simply functional power, which each organ draws from the soul. Now we get into particulars. That's also we have the Torah, Kolaseim, Prataseim. Mentioned in the beginning of this report. The general, and then now, there's more than the general. The eye needs to see, not hear. And the hair needs to hear, not see. So everything needs to go to a specific place. And every kind of energy needs to go to a specific place. And the different energies for these different places. So the second of life force, specific function and power, each organ draws from the soul. This power is unique to each organ. The eye receives from the soul the power to see, the ear to hear, and the mouth to speak, and the foot to walk. Now the question is, what is the manner? the manner in which each organ receives the latter force and functional power can be explained in two ways. One is that the life force emanating from the soul to the organ is utterly plain, uncompounded, possessing none of the vice qualities and powers of various organs. According to this explanation, the various functions of the powers of the organ would be different with respect to the life force emanating from them from the soul, only after the life force actually becomes enclosed within the organ. Like again, water. Water has no color. Now you put it into a red canister, it's red. Pour it into a blue one, it's blue. You pour it into a green one, it's green. So the only reason why it changed its colors is because of the vessel. So maybe also the same thing happens. The light of the soul goes into the ear, why? Because the vessel of the ear makes that life force different than the life force that comes into the eye. So that's one way of looking at it. Likewise, each organ is a plain, uncompounded life force from the soul, and it's the organ that gives the life force enclosed within the specific functional ability. The eye enables the life force to give the power to see. The ear, the physical ear, enables to give the power to hear. Second possible explanation, and that accepted by the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe wants to say, is that the soul, despite its pristine, uncompounded essence, including the potential form of all powers, included is the potential form of all powers of various organs. And in it, these faculties with which each individual organ receives, the eye receives from the life force of the soul, the power to see. The ear receives from the power to hear. That means in the soul itself, there's the power of hearing. These powers are originally included in potential within the soul, and each becomes revealed as a life force becomes enclosed within a separate organ. So there's two ways of looking at it. Thus, the power to see or hear does not originate only when the life force becomes enclosed within the ear to hear. It already exists in potential within the comprehensive life force emanating from the soul, although it's not yet revealed. The Tanya proceeds to explain that this is the correct explanation. The commentary of the Rebbe explains why we must accept this secondary explanation. Because if we were to say that the various functional power have no difference in potential within the life force until after it became clothed within the organ, like water or light, which itself possesses a color, but acquires it, that not possess a color, but acquires it when the view through a colored glass, then the brain would be conscious of the same sensation from its experience in the eye as it would experience in the ear, because these sensations have already been left the respective organs. So why does the brain feel a difference from the pain of the eye than the pain of the ear? Thus, too, water removed from the white vessel is no different from water removed from the red vessel. Once removed from the vessel, it loses the vessel's color. Likewise, messages conveying sensation from the eye will be no different from coming from the ear, since they have already left their respective organ. One might argue, according to this explanation, which Tanya does not accept, that when a particular organ calls into being function, power, in the life force, drawing it into the soul, this differentiation becomes acquired in the life force like an ingot of silver, which once it has been molded into the shape of a vessel, remains a shape later too. According to this argument, a different effect by each organ in the life force drawn into it from the soul remains also in the sensation transmitted from the organ back. Maybe you can argue that way, that even though the life force, the brain understands, feels it once it comes back, but maybe once it came into it, it already received the dimensions of what it came into. This would account by the different messages received by the brain, varying the sensation and according to experience by the eye and the ear, for example. So maybe you could still say that it still comes from the brain for the soul as a light. But once it came into the ear, it got the dimension of the ear. And that's why if it leaves the ear back to the soul feels it as an ear. If, however, we say the soul, which is based in his brain, is utterly transcends any kind of differentiation, even the differentiation and potential, in which the various powers of the organs are included within the soul, then the soul within the brain would not distinguish between the sensation of what happens in the eye and the sensation that happens in the ear and the other organs, because the soul itself, according to this explanation, is utterly plain and uncompounded. Even therefore, if the messages coming from the various organs to the brain are indeed different one from another, yet this difference would not be distinguishable by the soul and the brain, which utterly transcends all differences in organ functions. We must therefore say that the difference between the various function powers later revealed in the organs, even before the life force actually dawned to the soul of the organs, is in the soul itself. So the Rebbe wants to explain, wants to emphasize that in essence, the soul has all its potential. Tanya will now explain which level of soul this differential takes place. Where does a soul have all this potential? The variation in receiving the functional powers and a life force by the organs of the body from the soul, each organ. Receiving from the life, soul of the life force, and the power in different forms. Does not receive from the life force the essence and being that we should say that being an essence is divided into 248 parts, which is enclosed in 248 locations. According to the design and the various locations of the body. Were this the case, we would say that within the life soul itself, there were already revealed and differentiated various of functional powers of sight, hearing, and so on. And all these 248 powers, which exist within the soul, are enclosed within the body of the 248 organs, each in appropriate creation. We cannot, however, accept this approach. Because if you say this, so again, you have to understand how the says to say that the soul has 248 functions, and you're dividing the soul itself into 248 functions. You can't say that, because then you're giving the soul a dimension. You're saying the soul is divided into 248 functions. Soul's a part of God. It has no dimension. According to this, it would follow the soul's essence and being is designed in a physical design, and the likeness and the structure similar to the structure of the body, and that's God forbid. The soul has no structure of the body. The body has 248 limbs and 365 sinews. So the body has a structure. The soul has no structure. Just as the organs of the body have various shapes and forms, so according to this outlook, are the functional powers, while still within the soul, different from each other in form. But you cannot say that to a soul. We can't accept this. In the soul, rather, the soul is entirely a spiritual entity. It is a single entity, number one, and a spiritual entity. A single entity, its oneness is plain and uncompounded. As a spiritual entity, its spirituality is a form which is divested, it's separate, has no physical quality to it. It's divested from any physical design. It has no definition or physical space, or mid or gvul, or measure, or limitation. The soul is free from all such dimensions, by the virtue of the instinct being in essence. In fact, the soul is so plain and free from all of these that even when it's actually enclosed within the organs, they can't affect any change in the soul. Why does the organs, why does the body don't affect the soul? Because the soul is so pure that the soul and the body have no connection to one another. Besides that, that's what we say, the soul is so pure, so simple, and so undimensional, and you're putting into a body that is so dimensional. So therefore, you look at the soul itself. Therefore, after that, we continue. Really, you can't even say that the soul is in the head. And it's not valid concerning to the soul being the essence, that it's in the brain of the head more than it's in the feet. The soul is so simple. It's so plain and so pure. It's in the head, it's in the feet, it's all over. It's not in the head more than the feet, not in the feet more than the head. The second you say the soul is more in the head than the foot, then you have put a dimension to the soul. You have put a physical space and limitation to the soul. You cannot put a physical space and limitation to any soul. But just like you can't put a space and limitation to the soul, so that's why you can say that the soul has within it all 248 limbs. The soul that is so simple and so pure and so undimensional has within it all dimensions. So it's therefore, so on one hand, it's impossible to attribute the soul this limitation and being more in the head than the foot. And rather, the 630 kinds of functional powers and the vital forces are included within the soul. They're all included within the soul. Everything is included within the soul. The soul has the capacity to 248 limbs and 343 sinews. Not that you can sort of say put it in its place and say, here is the brain, here is the foot, here is the eye. Here, it's all in there. It's in there in a very oil-like way. It's in there in a light kind of a way, which is hard for us. Only the Eibishter can bring about. That's why you pray for God, Reifeya Kobasa. Because it's only God who can bring about that this soul that is so uncharacteristic, right word. It's the opposite of space and time. It's the opposite of a head and a foot. It's above it, has within it the head and the foot. So that's the greatest wonder of the world is right within us. We don't have to travel to the wonders of the world. That's the verse. From my own body, how my soul, who is so above any kind of space and time, can come into a space and time because it has within it all space and time. That is the wonder of creation. Lot says, to be able to come from the hidden to the actual. Right? To become actualized, to emerge from this concealment and inclusion within the soul's essence. Previously, while still included within the soul's essence, they are only in potential and therefore hidden within the soul, not even as a functional power, which are revealed as such while still included in the soul. In other words, within the soul is the concealment, a potential of 630 functional powers to become actualized and to emerge from this concealment, to become revealed. To order to animate 248 organs, separate organs. 365 blood vessels in the body. The functional power of the divine soul enclosed within the animated, the vital soul, which also possesses the corresponding 248 and 365 functional powers of the vital soul. Which this is a whole different subject, as you see. We have from the godly, from the nefesh, the godly soul comes into the vital soul. So the godly soul and the vital soul work together to be able to. The godly soul, which is the energy of God, comes into the vital soul, which gives the capability for everything to work. Considering these functional powers that are drawn and revealed from the soul into the body, the Alter Rebbe will now explain the principal location in which they are all drawn and where they are all revealed is in the brain. It is from there that the potential power spread to all the other organs of the body. But the essence of the soul exists equally in the foot, just as much in the brain. You have to learn this, as I tell you, I said many times, these things have to be learned many times just to get the picture. Until now, the Alter Rebbe has mentioned mainly 240 organs of the body, corresponding to 240 functional powers of the soul enclosed within them. Now, however, he goes to more detail, referring to the 613 functional powers, both in the 248 organs and those of the 365 blood vessels, each of which have its own unique life force from the soul. This explains why we now refer to 613 rather than 248, because we're going to bring them all together in one package, 613. Because we want to connect itself to the 613 mitzvahs. Now concerning the flow of all the 613 kinds of functional powers. The vital force which is drawn from the concealment of the soul, which they have previously been hidden, and from where they are now drawn to the body to animate it. On this they said, so when they say, where is this revealed? Again, where is this revealed? The capability for this soul to come into 613 physical realities, that's in the head. If you want to talk about the soul itself, it's neither in the head nor in the foot, it's both. It's in both places. There's no difference in the soul itself, in the head and the foot. But once you want to talk about its revelation, the revelation of the soul, the way the soul reveals itself, it's in the head. And therefore the brain, which receives the power and life force appropriate to them according to their composition and character, namely intellect, which is divided into three main faculties of Chachma, Bina, and Das, the Koyach HaMachshava, and the faculty of thought, and all the faculties of the brain. That's where to reveal first. And that's why it's important for a human being. Is Chachma, Bina, Das, because everything will be functioning much better if he has Chachma, Bina, and Das. And not only this, the brain receives the life force before the other organs, but also the overall flow of all the individual streams and vitalities to other organs is also included and enclosed in the brains of the head. Therefore, becomes revealed. Before it becomes revealed in the individual, everything comes from the head. And over there, if you want to talk a revelation of the soul, it's in your head. Because not only is your wisdom and knowledge and understanding in your head, everything that comes after that comes from your head. Because that's where it's revealed. From there, from the brain flows to all the other organs. From the brain knows how to give each body part its necessity. The brain knows exactly how to give each person and each part, not each part of the body what it needs. The capability of sight is revealed in the eye, and the capability of hearing is revealed in the ear. In other words, at which point does the power of sight come into existence and ready to revealed in the eye? And the power of hearing, where does it come in? Where is it revealed? Only after all the life force of the whole body is drawn into the brain in a general manner. Then a radiance is drawn from each to each organ. A radiance which is already constant in accordance with the particular character of the individual organ. So the brain knows exactly how much the eye needs to have to receive its sight. And the brain knows exactly what the ear needs to have. But all function powers flows from the brain as is known. For there in the brain is located the principal dwelling place of the entire soul in a revealed form. That's why you learned in the beginning of Tanya that your brain is your mishkan nefesh, is nefesh l'kis. The brain is the residing place of the godly soul. So again, although the soul actually exists over the entire body equally, we're going back, don't forget that, with no difference between the one organ and the other, yet the principal place where the soul is revealed in a revealed manner for each and every organ is in the brain. In the brain is the overall life force which flows from the soul is revealed. But only the individual faculty of the overall life force which finds forth and radiates from there, the brain, to all the organs of the body. Just as light radiates and shines from the sun with into the innermost of all rooms. Even the heart, even the heart, which is an essential organ. We know two essential organs of a person is his heart and his brain. That's why there's a whole argument in halacha today, even till today. What if you're brain dead? Are you considered dead? There's a whole argument because the heart can continue without the brain. If that's possible? There's a whole lot that is possible. So if somebody chas v'sholom is brain dead, according to some authorities, it's considered dead. According to some, it's not. As long as the heart is beating, that means there has to be some, even though the doctor or the heart, they say there's no brain function, it's impossible. There's got to be some kind of brain function, therefore the person's still alive. And some people hold no. This is a big argument. But self-understood, the main organs of a human being is his brain and his heart. But nevertheless, even the heart needs to receive from the brain. Even the heart is an essential organ, which all other organs receive vitality from the blood. The heart diffuses to all organs, receives its own vitality from the brain. So there needs to be some brain function to be able to give this heart its vitality. And therefore, that's why we explained in Tanya, in the beginning of Tanya, that the heart rules the brain. Why? Because the vitality of the heart comes from the brain. So even though the heart is a vital organ and actually gives life in a way to the rest of the organs of the body, but its vitality comes from the brain. Kiniskala, I mentioned above in chapter 12, explains that man is created with a natural supremacy of his brain over his heart. And the reason explained here, because the heart, despite its centrality, must in turn receive its own vitality from the soul through the medium of the brain. Again, why does the soul need a medium of the brain? Because the soul needs the brain for its revelation. It's important to emphasize. It doesn't need the brain. It needs the brain for its revelation in a physical body. Without the brain, it would not be able to reveal itself in the physical body. That's the way the Eibishter created the system. That the brain is the place where everything comes from. Everything comes from the soul, not from the brain. What do you mean it comes from the brain? That's correct. Everything comes from the soul. The way it emanates from the soul, there's no difference between the brain and the foot. The way it emanates in its revealed way from the brain, there is a difference between the head and the foot. There's a great difference. If the foot gets very sick, Chas v'shalom will amputate the foot. Right? And we can live on, Baruch Hashem. But if the head gets very sick, you can amputate your head, you're not going to live. It's very simple. You don't need an analogy to that. So that shows you, that's why in essence, there's only two real vital parts of the body, is the heart and the head. You can't you take either one of them out, you're not going to live. But other limbs, you could live without a hand, without feet. You could. I mean, nobody should live that way because we need every limb of the body. But you should have every limb, but it's not a vital organ. You're not going to be considered the opposite of life if you're not going to have that limb. So this was a very deep teaching of Chassidus, and we gave a great analogy. The Alter Rebbe didn't come to the interpretation of this analogy. How does it come to the concept of what means Hashras Hashchina? So in essence, you got already the picture, hopefully. The Alter Rebbe is explaining Mipsari, just like in the brain. To God, the Eibishter fills the world. But God reveals himself in the Beis HaMikdash. God reveals himself. The Shas HaShchina is in the Beis HaMikdash. What means, Alter Rebbe is going to say, what means that a person always has to look at his head? He has to always look at the Chachma, mind over matter. That's why it says, the God's above you. God is all over. God's within you. But if you always look, God's above you, you'll always realize that you need to always look above. You need to always look into Chachma, into wisdom, because wisdom controls everything. And that's the way you're going to control your emotions. That's the whole analogy that we're going to come to. Today is the 24th day of the month, which is the chapter 113 to 118. And that you'll do the Tillim of the day. I just want to, as we learn Tanya together, learn Torah together, Torah is light, as we saw right over here, it's light, and therefore, light chases away a lot of darkness, and learning together and learning Torah chases away a lot of darkness, and a lot of darkness in the world today, and through tragedies, it's murder of children, it's just above and beyond comprehension. I hope and I pray that bringing in a little light of Torah in the world together, we diminish some darkness in this world, and let's hope that God comforts all those families that have lost their children and gives them the strength to continue to be a light to the world. God bless you all. And I'll see you in Mitzvah tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We'll continue the Tanya of the day.